There's a really important story in the Old Testament that we're meant to remember when we hear the readings of the Beatitudes, especially Matthew's Gospel's version of the Beatitudes. We have in the Gospel today Jesus going up a mountain and giving us something new. And we're meant to remember that great story in the Old Testament when Moses went up the mountain, Mount Sinai, and gave us something new. Gave humanity the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. We're meant to remember that. And I was recently listening to a conference given at the Seek Conference in Columbus by a great Catholic speaker, Curtis Martin. And he had talked about in his conference about how he spent most of his life being a Catholic, a Christian, that was really just focused on the law, focused on the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, trying to be a Catholic that I'm doing everything I can to not commit sin, resist temptation, not break the law, not break one of the 10 Commandments. And of course, like we all fall, we all fail. And so the second half of that is seeking forgiveness, going and asking God for his mercy. He said, that's what I spent the majority of my life doing, just being that kind of a Catholic, doing everything I can to struggle against temptation, not fall, but when I do, just going to confession and seeking God's mercy. And of course, that's an important part of the Christian vocation. Doing our best to resist temptation, resist sin. One of the beautiful things we learn through the law is we learn of the lawgiver. That when we do fall, we don't encounter a God who's up there and has been waiting for us to violate the law, waiting for us to sin. We encounter a law or a God and a lawgiver who's ready to lift us up when we do fall. We encounter mercy itself. And it's a very important part of the Christian life, the Christian vocation, doing everything we can to not stumble and fall into sin. But when we do, throwing ourselves at the feet of God's mercy and encountering mercy itself, who's always ready, every single time, to lift us up. But Curtis Martin's point was that that kind of living, if that encompasses the Christian's life, just that, resisting sin, and then going to confession when we don't, that sort of a life never converted anyone to the gospel. That sort of living has never brought anyone to Christ. We need the law, absolutely. We need the Decalogue. We need the 10 Commandments, and we need to do our best to follow it because it outlines for us what we are not made for. It gives us the whole map of what we are not made for, God's law. But today is when we get the second half of the Christian vocation, what we are made for. And what we are made for is given not by Moses of old, but by the new Moses, Jesus, who walks up a mountain and explains and gives us the map of what we are made for. Beatitude. In a word, happiness. And what if we took that second part seriously? What if we didn't just receive God's grace and keep it to ourselves? What if we didn't just receive his mercy and then go home and feel good about it? What if we didn't just show up to Mass? What if we didn't just rest on our laurels of baptism and confirmation? What if we took all that grace and fanned into flame and shared what he has given us? And the way to do that is through the Beatitudes, The way to win others to the gospel is living the Beatitudes, being poor in spirit, which is to say living with abandon in this life, needing nothing, completely detached from everything of this world and living only for the next. That wins people for Christ. That fans into flame something that can't be contained in us. It wins souls to the gospel. What if we really did mourn our sins and regret them bitterly? What if we really did live mercifully and do only acts of mercy and acts of righteousness and go out every day and just do that? What if we really did that? What if we were pure of heart and lived single-minded and focused all of our love on Christ's love and sharing that purity with others? What if we really were peacemakers? And we can use a few more of those. What if instead of complaining about all the violence and all the craziness that goes on, we ourselves were just peacemakers? And we sought to be peacemakers. What if when we're persecuted for our faith, for Christ, instead of resenting and being angry, we actually rejoiced? We were actually glad because we got to suffer for him who suffered for us. What if we weren't just people who struggled to live the law, which is important, who didn't just seek mercy when we needed it, but to take the grace of all that God gives us and to share it with the world around us, to be transformed by it into another Christ and to share him with everyone we meet? That converts. That wins souls. That makes beatitude. That makes happiness. We have no further to look than the saints, who themselves thought they were the worst of sinners in creation, in all of history. They thought they were the worst sinners. And they absolutely went to God and threw themselves at his mercy. But they lived their life according to the Beatitudes, and they completely threw themselves into the second half of the Christian vocation that we get today through the new Moses, Jesus Christ. And even after their death, their lives, their flames of faith have continued to inspire countless souls to the gospel, to Christ. But even that beyond the saints. I'll give you a concrete example of how this works and worked last weekend. Last weekend, it was our parish's turn to host the community meal. And that happens on Sunday afternoon. And of course, as you all know, we got a ton of snow last Sunday, which I was brought back for you all from Minnesota. I wanted you all to have as much fun as I did up there. But in light of that storm, we had to cancel the community meal, or it was canceled. But the coordinator for us at St. Gabriel and our 6th grade teacher said, we can't do that. There's dozens of people, usually 60 to 80 people, that depend on that food every Sunday evening because they have no food to eat. And so our 6th grade teacher, her husband, our coordinator got together and they figured it out. And they made sure that 67 people who wouldn't have ate dinner got to eat dinner last Sunday night. Me, I was sitting on my rear end in Rushville, sitting on my couch in sweatpants and a hoodie, watching football, feeling good about myself because I walked the 500 yards to St. Mary's and said Mass for them in the middle of the snowstorm. Thought, wow, I'm really great. But I hear what's going on in Connersville, in that this heroic activity is taking place. And I just wanted to be a part of it. I didn't want to get in the way, but I just wanted to be a part of it. So I got dressed, got in my truck, and it didn't work out. I didn't make it all the way over here, but that's the point. When we really live the Beatitudes, when we really allow ourselves to be transformed by God's grace completely and seek to share that grace with the world around us, others just want to be a part of it. They want to come into it. They want that same light and warmth of Christ in their life. Simply struggling to follow the law and seek God's mercy when we fall in it wins nobody, absolutely nobody, to Christ. It wins us, to be sure, and that's important, very important. But being transformed by God's mercy and sharing it, that can win a world. That can win a world for beatitude.